Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can join our mailing list and learn more about how we can help you build content to drive e-commerce sales at itsrapid.ai. My guest on today's show is Ann Zybowski, Vice President of E-commerce and Digital Shelf at Circana. For those of you who are not yet familiar with Circana, the new company name launched in March of 2023, you are likely familiar with the two legacy companies formerly known as IRI and NPD. Ann began her career with Chase Manhattan Bank in New York and London, evolving into financial consulting roles before pivoting into strategic consulting for retailers and brands. She has been a pioneer in the e-commerce and digital space for over 15 years. Ann started her journey at Kantar Retail as a subject matter expert in the mass class of trade and held senior leadership positions as she built out Kantar's global digital e-commerce practice. Ann moved to the brand side at the Clorox Company with multiple roles in e-commerce and omni-channel capabilities, including leading omni-channel retail and digital shelf analytics. Prior to Circana, she was Vice President of Strategy and Client Development at IdeoClick. We discuss Ann's experience as subject matter expert for Target, Walmart, and Amazon at Kantar, her work at Clorox, and her learnings at Circana. Please enjoy my conversation with Ann Zybowski. Ann, great to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Always a pleasure. Well, it's great to have you on the show today. I wanted to start off with a little background on you and your career. You've had a very successful career as a senior leader in e-commerce, ranging from roles at Kantar to the Clorox Company and now at Circana. Tell us how you got your start and the journey to where you are now.
Absolutely. So I'm going to divide my start into kind of two sections because I had sort of the post retail and post Kantar start of my career, but I think that sets up the stage for everything else. As I graduated from Hopkins, I had a degree in economics and a minor in psychology and was one credit shy of a minor in math, but I was always really good with numbers and I just never knew what to do with that. And that meant I should be an engineer or what that meant. But I started my career actually at the Chase Manhattan Bank doing econometric modeling, and then even post business school got into financial consulting. So it was very much based on data analytics, economics, how those parts and pieces all come together. But I was always hungry for a little bit more and always intellectually curious, I guess would be the theme of I'm good at this, but what else might I be good at and what else might I want to do? And I think that is a passion that has been helpful in exploring emerging areas like e-commerce and continuing to grow, both create new things and continue to push the envelope personally in the career and what the things that I'm able to do. So I guess I would say in that first part of my career, especially in the financial consulting piece, I both had a role in London that was helpful to explore my horizons and really embrace diversity and understand cultures a little bit better and how important culture is both in who people are and the environments in which you want to work and the people that you want to spend your time with outside of home. And also in that role, it was a very male dominated field. And so I feel like I had to work always a little bit harder and differently to stand out and continue to advance. So while I didn't realize that at the time, especially as we talk now, about diversity and equity. That was definitely a chapter when I got sent home for wearing a pantsuit to work. And right, I had to wear a watch and these kinds of things that just seem so crazy now. When we're encouraging people to be themselves at work, that wasn't always the case, but was lessons that I think sort of built who I am in the second phase of my career. I would say the second phase was really the journey that I started at Kantar when I had been doing a lot of my financial consulting for retailers from J.C. Penney to Ahold, Whole Foods, and others. And I realized that I really wanted to move from just financial consulting more into strategy. So at Kantar, I think that's where I really built the foundation of understanding retailer strategy, and then also working with suppliers to understand, based on a retailer's strategy, how do you carve out a JBP, what are the things that you need to do, and at the intersection of partnership. So that's a big piece that I built. And as I led 15 years ago, the pivot from following the mass class of trade, and Walmart and Target and Kmart even mattered back then, if you can believe it, that long ago. They were still tactical, but they still mattered, into e-commerce and a whole new channel. And what's this retailer called Amazon? And how do we figure it out? And continuing to build new practices and capabilities ever since then.
It seems like you have a natural curiosity and an affinity for the strategic side of the business. Was that always the case, or where did that spring from?
Yeah, I think it was always the case based on some of the financial consulting, but definitely was fostered and developed at Kantar, where I had to pull that together and also help train and teach others. I think besides a constant yearning for intellectual curiosity and learning the next thing that interests and sparks me, and continuing to learn both personally and professionally, I think I learned a long time ago when I was deathly afraid of presenting and then had to present to hundreds of people in my role that I was not aware when I accepted the job. I learned quickly and embraced public speaking because I just enjoy teaching other people. And I've always found, right, that intellectual curiosity, you figure stuff out, then you learn by doing a little bit. And after you learn by doing, you really learn by teaching. And so I think that's another common thread to these things. And especially as e commerce has been so dynamic, being able to provide some of the contextual frameworks has been really helpful. I'll give you a couple of examples. At Kantar, we were known for not only covering like strategy and sales share growth and like what we expected from all the different channels of retail across the board to help suppliers set their goals and targets and understand where growth was going to come from and how to place bets. But we also had a number of frameworks to think about what are the types of retailers and how to grow. And so I think together with Brian Gildenberg, we probably created maybe a dozen frameworks across the board that ranged from donors and choosers to collab negotiation was a great made up word that we had, to actually shopper ROI was a big one. And even in the e-commerce space, when everybody was saying, well, it's only 1% of my sales, why does it matter? Probably one of the most impactful frameworks we put together was the 10, 50, 100 framework, which at the time meant even though it's 1% of sales in CPG and food, it's 10% of everything bought and sold in a consumer's life. And so those habits create expectations across everything people purchase. At the time, Forrester had done a study that e-commerce and digital had a 50% influence on everything bought and sold. So influence was the 50%. And then the 100 was essentially that from a consumer perspective, your digital experience had 100% influence on everything. So even something as simple as going into a store to pick up a printer or an item that you might have just previously expected to get a rain check ticket or something else to come back. It was like sometimes out of stocks happen. When you know that you could have ordered that online, not left your house and gone to the store and wasted all that time and had it delivered, it changes your expectations and even your experience in the physical store across the board. So I think now we're getting close to the 10 is now 30. In some of the Forrester reports, the influence is now at 70, and a recent Profitero report now puts influence at 80, and the 100% still lives. So I think the ability to put things in context is extremely important as you take a look at how markets and retailers and other things develop. That's an important part of understanding the growth trajectory. And when you think about adoption and influence and driving change in an organization, some of those nuggets and frameworks to put stuff in context are really important to influence and driving adoption.
Things have changed a little bit since the 1% of the business
Yes.
times.
Especially accelerated in COVID, right? It was already on a trajectory, but right, that fast forwarded the industry probably by at least 5 years of development.
How I think it's such an interesting point on the influence and there's the purchase and our experience, but there's also this influence component. And I think often in these the businesses discussions, that influence portion of the business strategy is often forgotten or it's underemphasized in the discussion. Do you find that as well? And I guess how do you keep that top of mind when people are thinking about their strategy?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It has been lost a lot. It's interesting. I started my new role at Circana in November, and recently we've been doing an Omni Growth series in partnership with Profitero and First Mover. And I think one of the things that's interesting in this new role, I'm now again at the center of brands, right, out of Clorox themselves as a brand and into a position where I can see where multiple brands are across the spectrum. And I think that's something that also has always given me perspective in my career, that your ability to see across brands and have an external perspective, you're able to identify trends across the board. And recently, I think it's interesting because amidst a lot of the economic pressures and challenge for incremental growth, we've seen a lot of restructurings across companies and a lot of leading companies looking to integrate e-commerce now that we've been doing this for 15 years, theoretically, back into the core function. So things like content and retail media back into right, where it belongs in the brand organization. Taking some of the things that were specialized roles in e-commerce on the retailer teams and moving that back into the account teams. And we're still at a stage, 15 years of e-commerce later, where the adoption of that and the integration and the implementation is still actually hard.
And will you parse that apart? The retailer teams and the account teams. What's going on there? That's different, or what's changing there?
Yeah, so I think on the brand side, a lot of the brands are trying to develop capabilities that they can apply across accounts and then right, move some of those capabilities and have their category managers and sales teams responsible for both what's happening online and what's happening in store and being able to talk omni channel. And what we've been hearing across the board, retailers are asking more and more for their category leaders to be omni channel leaders. And right, some people have developed that skill set, but that's still very limited. And there's opportunity to really drive systematic adoption across the board there. But what I would say is that we have seen sort of that gap continue to linger. And then the other thing is, as brands are trying to develop standardized capabilities, retailers and the buyers themselves continue to change. So Walmart, as an example, they've been through multiple evolutions from Sam Bruno and dealing with Sam Bruno for everything e-commerce to then their initial merging of the roles. Maybe 4 years ago, if that's about right, and when they kind of merged folks. And then the experience was very different if you had an omni-channel buyer who came from San Bruno versus one that grew up in Bentonville. And some of those folks were hungry to learn and others weren't. And I think across the board, even some of the leading omni-channel retailers where there's a huge share of the business that's done in online grocery, other things at the digital shelf, there's still a variation in the people in the roles and the expectation of actually delivering and knowing what's happening online versus habit and what just used to be done and focusing on negotiations of price. But I think one of the things that's starting to change that tremendously is the push for retail media as a way to get brand dollars and now two parts of the organization in which brands are having to work. They're having to work with the buying and the merchandising organization, which is very tactical. And right, theoretically, retailers were they all went to negotiation training, and that's their role. Like continue to ask for more and more and more money, right, across the board to help drive their business and fund their growth.
Right.
And then retail media that is seen as another way to compete with Amazon to get access to brand dollars. But at the end of the day, there's not an infinite bucket of demand creation dollars, and you need to find a way to be able to work that. I was recently at a conference for retail media, and it was interesting because I had one of the retail media networks folks say, like, listen, while my merchant may only care about the items this brand is selling in my physical stores, right? I'm a publisher and I care about the entire portfolio. I don't care if it's sold at this store or not, right? Across the board. And so I think, right, and the retail media folks, they're the customer, right? Like we wear different hats. I think brands sometimes forget on the retail media side that, they're actually the customer and they need to be asking for more, right? If I'm going to give you more money, I expect more metrics, more transparency, more visibility in return. Whereas on the merchandising side, it's the flipped, right? Or the retailer is the customer, and they're the ones demanding more from brands and developing that partnership.
So I guess it's a question of who's pitching whom in these conversations.
Yes.
Now, if you're a big brand, we, as you know, work with PepsiCo and a number of other large brands. You have these teams that are focused on retail media, on the merchandising part. You have account teams. This is all built out. What about kind of our small and mid-sized brands that want to participate in retail media, but maybe don't have the staff and the infrastructure that a larger brand has? How can they work with the retailers? How should they be thinking about some of their investments here?
Yeah, so I think thinking about it as demand creation dollars instead of separate buckets of money, I think is an important one, and understanding those capabilities. All companies, regardless of size, I think are relying on agencies more with specialization and their expertise to make sure, and looking for agencies that are connecting the dots between media that's spent elsewhere and retail media, e-commerce, and looking for that to be brought together to be able to look holistically at the brand money, and where it's spent and what proportion is then carved out for retail media. Or is it, does it start from the other side and the money that brands are putting together for customers and carving out some of that to work together? But I think across the board, there's a number of things that brands can do, not only from a budgeting perspective to take a look at that, but I think process and leadership and partnership really come to the forefront because we're all continuing to learn in this space. And there's always better returns by partnership, right? So whether that's purely on the retail media side and helping retailers understand what maybe their competitors are doing, not naming them, but what else are they providing, or what else are other publishers providing that would be helpful to secure more money in returns, and really getting crisp on the ROI metrics that we're using towards objectives, right? Defining both objectives, and then, right, are the investments that we're making holistically in store, online, and beyond the store actually paying out for us, and holding them accountable to that.
It's great. Now, you've had this very, I think, unique perspective where you've been at Kantar, you've spent time leading ecom, digital shelf, a lot of capabilities at Clorox. So you've kind of gotten to see a lot of different parts of the industry. And I think that gives you a really unique perspective. How have you seen the industry change the last few years? We've had COVID, of course, we've had retail media. What are some of the things that are top of mind for brands and retailers that you're working with?
Yeah, so it's funny, some of the challenges still seem the same as they were 15 years ago, but obviously there's been a lot of development and maturity in e-commerce and omni-channel, and us thinking more broadly about connected commerce as an industry, but yet there's still a gap in how we want to approach the business and tactically and from an execution perspective, how it's being adopted across the board. So I guess the big pieces that really accelerated with COVID, I think one was the incrementality question went away. Right? I think pre-COVID, brands spent a lot of time trying to prove out was e-commerce incremental or not. I still think when we get into those discussions, people, when they say e commerce, really mean through the mail e commerce that requires shipping and other things versus a store pickup. That's very different economics when it's picked up from the store and it's going through the same distribution system that everything else that's, quote, more profitable is. I still think not enough brands are doing that homework and bucketing all e commerce as this big, unprofitable thing and not really kind of dissecting that across the board to understand the true economics. But I think kind of post that.
By segment, you mean by
Exactly.
delivery, by, yeah.
Yeah. By how it actually gets there, right? Does it have to be delivered to in a truck or a car, or right? Somebody coming to your house or close to you, or right? Or do you go to get it?
Yeah.
Whether that's in a parking lot or in a physical store, right? How it gets to that point of transfer matters, right? And more, especially as we've seen the acceleration of online grocery, that point of pickup is at or near a store, which is very different economics. There's still picking, packing, and shipping that's involved in getting that order ready for you. But it's actually interesting. I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day that was talking about all the theft now that's happening in physical stores. Last week, I was shopping with my kids and we were in the mall for back to school, and there was clearly a security guard or two at every little store kind of looking out for theft. Dick's and some others have cited theft in their stuff. And the post was talking about what a bad customer experience it is to have like toothpaste and right, things that even aren't that high a price point under lock and key in the physical store. And the thought going through my head was, well, that puts the economics in the perspective of having right store employee putting together the
Yeah.
basket, right, and making sure that they've paid for everything in there, right, versus some of the challenges that folks are having in store.
So love it. I wanted to come back around to your role today. So we touched on Kantar, where we originally met when I was at Content Analytics, and you were at Kantar. We talked about your time at Clorox a little bit. Now you're at Circana. Tell us a little about that. What are you up to?
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of launching a digital shelf solution in partnership with Profitero. And with that, we're actually bringing all the causals in. So we're kind of completing the picture of omni-channel analytics and ROI. I think one of the challenges that the industry has faced has been the barrier of the e-commerce data, the definitions, the system read, everything has been different and it doesn't translate to the way that everything else is measured across the board. And even in order to try to get a complete picture of share, right, it's been a long time coming to get those things kind of merged in together to get a total picture of the marketplace. But we've made amazing strides in there to be able to take a look at the complete picture. So our digital shelf solution that we've launched at Circana actually takes the digital shelf signals of was it available, was it priced right, how did I show up in search and placement, findability, were the ratings and reviews and the content right, and it actually brings it into the environment where all of the EPOS lives, as well as all the in-store sales and in-store causals, like was it on feature price and promotion. And so
So I could really start to understand the connection between the
exactly.
yeah.
So we've got a total picture. So if you look at any brand today, the folks focusing on stores are already in Circana and they're taking a look at our base and incremental models and understanding was it price, promo, display, like what was it that drove sales and where am I getting my incrementality from? And that's been a core piece of what folks do in their weekly and daily routines from a store basis. We've done a great job. Sam Gagliardi and the e-commerce team at Circana has been pushing the envelope. We've got the broadest coverage in terms of EPOS from retailers directly and increasingly adding new fulfillment types to that. We believe in transparency and got over 20 retailers for which we're putting in EPOS, and even where retailers aren't sharing it with us, we have unique capabilities with liquid data to bring in custom signals for like Amazon EPOS or Walmart Luminate to bring those into the environment as well. And then on top of that, we're able to connect that EPOS with now the online causals. So in the same place that you have your in-store causals, you've got 70% more driver metrics from what's happening on the online shelf. Where if we go back to the beginning in our 10, 50, 100, which is now a 30, 70, or 80, 100 model, you need to be understanding to understand and lead your category where 78 to 80% of the influence is. And we've got now all those parts and pieces connected.
Has there been a shift there? I know brands have always wanted, of course, more data from the retailer and more visibility. It sounds like maybe there is a little more openness now, or a little movement, I guess, especially with retail media and some of these other new initiatives. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, it's slowly but surely more data.
Yeah.
And as that data is commercialized in different way, yeah, retailers are looking at monetizing the data. And one could make an argument that even your investment in retail media isn't so much about the consumer experience or what's happening in store. It's about getting some of that data, right? That data from retail media is another part of the value proposition that's less talked about, but really interesting from how you think about the different parts of your organization that need to be connected to some of this valuable data and leveraging that then for targeting and more precise targeting in the marketplace. Um, so I think that's really interesting about where the market's headed and how we think about this data. But then the challenge too becomes it's great having more data, but if nobody's doing anything with it, and if the data doesn't talk to each other. And so that's been a really interesting place where at Circana, we've got the unique capability with liquid data to integrate data from multiple places into one platform, and having that single harmonized view is a really important capability that we're working with a lot of our partners on to make sure that that data can actually be used and talk to each other.
How you mentioned kind of you've got the account teams, the brand teams. If we talked about retail media, how are brands kind of having these teams work together? They are different interactions and initiatives with the retailers. Is there kind of a best practice there, or still developing?
I think it's still developing. I would say most teams at least have e-commerce, although there's a large portion of where I would kind of call the perimeter or fresh providers too, that e-commerce is still a little bit new, that they don't have dedicated e-commerce teams. And so I do think even though the one might argue that those folks are a little bit behind in e-commerce development, I think they have an opportunity to leapfrog, right? They've learned right where other people are going now that they're trying to integrate it. So how do they just build those capabilities into the people that are already doing the store work? How do they maybe leapfrog versus building out really separate e-commerce teams to then only right try to bring it back into the core functions across the board? And if that's where really most brands are, is trying to figure out where you need specialists and where we can integrate it. But still an educational opportunity, a structure opportunity. But I think when people talk structure, what they always overlook is processes. And I think the most important thing in figuring out where content should live, where budgeting and funds should sit for media, as well as all the stuff on the store side, both in store and online, you've got to be looking at your specific processes, where the barriers are, and then working towards either dotted lines or other things to help build out and integrate the processes and define the work. Because I think, especially in some of the top down org designs, a lot of that gets lost, as well as the knowledge and capabilities that individuals have lost versus the infrastructure and the roles and the role descriptions of the work that's meant to be done.
So an opportunity to jump ahead.
Absolutely. Leapfrog.
I love it. Well, you mentioned one of my favorite words in there, content. So I want to spend a moment talking about that. You've seen this evolution. I mean, 10 years ago we had just trying to get the pack shot updated was hard work. Now we have much more sophisticated systems. You have digital shelf analytics, like you were talking about. What are some of the best brands doing in terms of their content initiatives? Is it how have things changed? You've from this experience at Clorox and now at Circana. What's similar and what's new?
Yeah, so I think probably too, while some leaders were making progress on integrating some of the content, or at least a recognition within marketing and content creation departments that were more interested in creative, that PDP content and pack shot rate and product stuff wasn't just a tactical thing, right? It's an important part of the overall experience for all digital touch points, not just how it shows up on other retailer.com sites. I think post COVID, when so much of the experience was online, then there was a huge immersion and just how important it was and the push for adoption. As what I would say is that I might turn that around and talk about a challenge that I might issue to brands and how they think about just how they bring products to market overall, and maybe starting with innovation, but how they weave that in across the board to the existing products they have. Is as you think about the fact that digital has an 80% influence, when we're starting to think about what should be on the quote package, let's not start with the physical shelf. Let's actually start with the digital shelf where we have much more flexibility. I mean, so much of the physical process and what happens between R&D and stuff showing to market, especially as innovation has become a hot topic, and how do we cycle innovation faster and not have it take 1 year, 2 year, 3 years to market. There's a lot of regulation that is required to what can needs to physically be on the package that somebody picks up at the shelf. We have a blank slate online, and we can really think about, right, what were the UVPs, or what are the unique features and benefits about that product, which is why we decided we need to create it. One of the biggest unlocks I had one time at Clorox with one of our retailer partners was bringing them into our innovation facility and talking about all the products. And as I was thinking about the digital shelf, I thought, man, if we could just record the R&D person and what they're doing here, like AI would write for itself the product detail page. But instead, we're taking a look at, right, what is the physical product and then trying to rebuild it. So I guess my challenge on content.
So a digital shelf mindset, is that the yeah.
Yes, a digital shelf mindset or an
Hmm.
omni-channel
Yeah.
mindset to the package overall, as we think about, right, how the consumer's engaging and close that gap between R&D and what shows up on both the physical package and the digital shelf.
And starting with the digital view first, I think that's really interesting. It's a great challenge. See which of our brands can rise to the challenge, and keep you posted on it. And then you can score them, I'm assuming, on their success on that.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned one other word before we wrap up here, AI. It's the hot topic. Everyone's talking about it.
Mhm.
How are you thinking about it at in your role, and also what are you seeing with brands and retailers?
As we think about AI, there's some really interesting things that Circana is working in on overall as it relates to analytics and voice and AI, and got something called Emery to help drive speed and efficiency and some of the analytics that folks are doing off the data more broadly. As I think about the application for brands and in the industry, I'll talk use cases and application in a second, but I think the thing that people forget in the hype about what we might be able to do with AI is just how important a data foundation is to AI and what feeds it. And, it's always been garbage in, garbage out when you talk about data, and especially when you're trying to apply AI to streamline some of this stuff. We talked about the complexity of data sets that don't talk to each other and in other places and things. And so, right, that's for data engineers and others that are better at that than I am to solve for. But right before we start applying AI, we've got to get our house in order and clean and ready to be able to kind of feed what we want to do with it. I think from an application perspective, what's really fascinating is, I know at Content Analytics are exploring a lot with AI and content creation, which I find fascinating, especially since a lot of those tweaks are always things that creative people view as way more tactical in terms of where they are. And so I think there's a lot of both, I guess, the visual representation that can be automated through AI, but I think there's a lot of the customization of an image, right, from what Target wants in their experience versus Walmart versus, right, every other retailer trying to make their shelf look different. And all that customization is, I guess a law of diminishing returns on that AI is really interesting in that front. And then I also think there's just a ton going on from a visual perspective and the ability to use AI to understand, which image, pack shot, hero shot rate are folks really connecting with and performance and leveraging that in the environments in which shoppers are engaging with them and use those to optimize.
Love it. So, if I had to kind of distill some of the takeaways for our audience, I think one would be this digital first mindset as a challenge for the brands. One is the importance of the data quality for AI and all these different applications. And then I think learnings from your career are really this ability to shift between the tactics and then the strategic, and then to go back and forth and really apply these.
Yeah, and then I guess the one thing between tactics and strategy that I would lean on that is, right, to drive change. You really need some of those nuggets around influence. So as we think about the digital first or omni first mindset, whichever works in the organizations, how do we continue to put our minds back in the consumer shoes? Because I think a lot of times we get lost in the jargon of e-commerce and the jargon of our industry, and we say that it's all for the consumer, but we actually lose track of the consumer. So really implement the consumer first, the consumer's omni. How do we really live that day to day in how we're trying to connect with that shopper along the path to purchase and the total experience, both across our own D2C assets, social commerce, as well as into the retailer environments.
Well, so many great insights. Before I wrap up with you here, I would love to ask our guests a couple of questions on a personal note. First off, two people who have inspired you in your professional life.
First one is Lene Brown at Clorox. I've known her throughout my career from when I started e-commerce. She's retired now, but even in my years at Kantar, I viewed her as a very strong female senior leadership that had influence way beyond Clorox, and always informally looked to her as a mentor. So when I decided I had no life at Kantar and wanted to go someplace else, she was the first person that I went to even explore, can I and should I would I even be good at moving to a brand side, which quickly led to me partnering with her there, and a lot that I learned from her there. And she was probably the master of influence, right? She understood the frameworks and the systems, and right how each of the functions within the organization at Clorox worked. And she was then really good also at finding the right nuggets of influence and also creating a culture of leadership and change adoption that I learned a ton from. And the second one is probably, I'll take one from my first chapter of my career, because this is one that I'm still working on. But Mark Babunovic was my first manager and mentor at Chase Manhattan Bank, and also followed him to my time at London. And what I learned the most from him, I was so surprised amongst a bunch of leaders that talked all the time to just how much he listened and how effective he was. And so sometimes I have to catch myself too, because I get really involved in solving problems and right wanting to do it all. But in various different environments, and especially in developing people, what's most important is actually listening. So whether that's people development, whether that's partnerships with retailers or others, spending more time to make sure we're truly listening to be able to then figure out how to partner together is a big one that I took from him.
Love it. Two great sources of inspiration there for sure. Now, the other question I have for you is hobbies outside of work and family.
I don't know if good wine, good food, and good company counts as a hobby, but that is certainly
Absolutely. Absolutely.
that is certainly one that any chance that I have, like that was, just how I love to spend my time. And then I guess the other one speaks to, consistently learning. The other thing that I've been doing a lot of since I got thrown into it at COVID for my daughter to be able to play basketball is learning to coach basketball. So I grew up as a swimmer. I played a little bit of softball and a few other things along the way, but with swimming and 2 practices a day and a 12-month a year commitment, there wasn't room for too much else, which is why my kids all play team sports. But I got thrown into coaching basketball as I am an assistant coach. And each year I do a lot, right, for our league to get it organized and help develop basketball. But went to my last WNBA game the other night and got to meet a lot of legends and watch some of that. So and we're about heading into tryout season. So I'm gearing up for yet another basketball season and learning a little bit more.
And you are a true inspiration. I'm still a work in progress on so many of these things, and I always find our interactions so inspiring. So thank you for that. Now, if people want to get in touch with you online, what's the best way for them to find you?
Probably via LinkedIn and Zybowski, Zybowski, and look forward to connecting with many of your audience. As you can tell, both you and I've got a passion for this subject and connecting with other people that have a passion for learning and really leading our industry forward.
Well, Anne, thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Dave. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard, please visit our website at itsrapid.ai, where you can find out more about how we're helping leading brands like PepsiCo save thousands of hours a year when it comes to retail media and digital shelf content creation. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more great episodes of Beyond the Shelf. See you next time.